The starship Meridian dropped out of hyperspace with a gentle shudder that Marcus Chen barely noticed. He stood at the observation deck, watching as Zenthara Prime grew larger in the viewport. The planet looked like a giant blue jewel floating in space, covered with crystal towers that reached up toward the stars. Marcus adjusted his dark blue diplomatic uniform and checked his watch. He had been traveling for 3 weeks to reach this place. The journey from Earth to the Zentharan Empire's capital world was long, but this meeting could change everything for humanity. "Ambassador Chen," said Captain Rivera as she walked up behind him, "we'll be docking in 30 minutes. Are you ready for this?" Marcus nodded. "As ready as anyone can be, I suppose. The Zentharans are known for being difficult. That's putting it nicely," the captain said with a small smile. "From what I've heard, they think they're better than everyone else in the galaxy." Marcus had heard the same stories. The Zentharan Empire controlled dozens of star systems. They had technology that made other species look primitive. They could read minds, move objects without touching them, and their weapons could destroy entire fleets. Most alien species either served them or stayed far away from their territory. But humanity was different. Humans had something the Zentharans wanted: rare metals that were only found on Earth's colonies. The Zentharans also had technology that could help humans explore deeper into space. It should have been a simple trade agreement, but nothing was ever simple with the Zentharans. The docking process took another hour. Marcus used the time to review his notes one more time. He knew the basic facts about Queen Vallana, the ruler of the Zentharan Empire. She was young for a queen, only 26 years old, but she had been in power for 5 years. Her people respected her because she was incredibly smart and had strong telepathic abilities. What worried Marcus was what he had heard about her personality. Queen Vallana was proud, maybe too proud. She expected other species to bow down to her and treat her like she was a goddess. She didn't like it when people disagreed with her or treated her as an equal. Marcus had been chosen for this mission because he was good at staying calm under pressure. He had successfully negotiated with difficult alien species before, but he had never dealt with anyone quite like Queen Vallana. The Meridian finally docked at the main spaceport on Zenthara Prime. Marcus gathered his belongings and walked to the airlock. As the doors opened, he got his first real look at the Zentharan capital city. The buildings were amazing. Tall crystal towers stretched up into the sky, glowing with soft-colored lights. Flying vehicles moved between the towers like schools of fish. The streets below were wide and clean, filled with Zentharans going about their daily business. The Zentharans themselves were tall and thin, with pale blue skin and large dark eyes. They moved gracefully, almost like they were floating instead of walking. Marcus could feel them staring at him as he walked through the spaceport. Most of them had probably never seen a human before. A group of Zentharan guards met Marcus at the customs area. They wore flowing robes that seemed to shift color in the light. Their leader, a tall female with intricate markings on her forehead, stepped forward. "Ambassador Chen," she said in accented English. "I am Commander Zixara. I will escort you to the royal palace." "Thank you, Commander," Marcus replied politely. "I'm honored to be here." The commander's large eyes studied Marcus carefully. He got the feeling she was trying to read his mind, but nothing happened. Humans had discovered early in their contact with telepathic species that their minds were naturally resistant to mental intrusion. It was one of the few advantages they had. The journey to the palace took them through the heart of the city. Marcus rode in a floating vehicle that moved silently through the air. Below them, he could see Zentharans going about their daily lives. Some stopped to point up at the strange human visitor. The royal palace was the most beautiful building Marcus had ever seen. It was made entirely of what looked like white crystal, but it was stronger than any material humans had ever developed. The palace seemed to glow from within, creating patterns of light that shifted and moved across its surface. "The Queen will see you immediately," Commander Zixara said, as they landed at the palace entrance. "She does not like to be kept waiting." Marcus followed the commander through the palace corridors. The walls were covered with moving artwork that seemed to respond to their presence. Strange music played softly in the air, though Marcus couldn't see where it was coming from. They passed dozens of Zentharan nobles and servants. All of them stopped what they were doing to stare at Marcus. He could hear them whispering to each other in their musical language. Some looked curious, others seemed disgusted by his presence. The throne room was enormous. The ceiling stretched up so high that Marcus couldn't see the top. The walls were made of the same glowing crystal as the rest of the palace, but here they pulsed with different colors, blues, purples, and greens that swirled together like a living aurora. At the far end of the room sat Queen Velana on her crystal throne. She was beautiful in an alien way, with the same pale blue skin as her people but somehow more vibrant. Her long silver hair seemed to float around her head as if she was underwater. Her dark eyes were fixed on Marcus as he walked across the vast floor toward her. The queen was surrounded by advisors and courtiers. Marcus could feel their eyes on him as he approached. Some looked amused as if they were watching an entertaining show. Others looked angry like they thought his presence was an insult to their queen. Marcus stopped about 10 feet from the throne and gave a respectful bow of his head. He didn't kneel or grovel like he suspected most visitors did. He was here as a representative of humanity, and humans bowed to no one. "Your Majesty," Marcus said clearly, "I am Ambassador Marcus Chen, representing the United Earth Federation. I thank you for agreeing to meet with me." Queen Velana studied him for a long moment. Marcus could feel the weight of her gaze, and he sensed she was trying to use her telepathic abilities on him. When nothing happened, a small frown appeared on her face. "So?" she said finally, her voice carrying easily across the vast room. "You are the human ambassador." "You are smaller than I expected." Some of the courtiers laughed at this. Marcus kept his expression neutral. "I hope that won't interfere with our negotiations, Your Majesty." "Negotiations?" The queen's eyebrows rose slightly. "Is that what you think this is?" Marcus felt a chill run down his spine, but he maintained his calm demeanor. "I was led to understand that Your Majesty was interested in establishing trade agreements between our peoples." Queen Velana leaned back in her throne. Around her, objects began to rise into the air. Small crystals, pieces of jewelry, even some of the courtiers' belongings. They floated in complex patterns around her head, a display of her telekinetic powers. "Tell me, Ambassador Chen," she said as the objects danced around her, "what makes you think humanity has anything to offer the Zentharan Empire?" Marcus Chen looked up at the floating objects circling Queen Velana's head. The display was impressive, but he had seen similar demonstrations before from other telepathic species. What mattered wasn't what she could do with her mind. It was what she was willing to do with her empire. "Humanity offers several things that might interest Your Majesty," Marcus said calmly. "We have exclusive access to rare earth elements that are essential for advanced technology. Our mining operations on the outer colonies have discovered deposits that don't exist anywhere else in known space." The queen's dark eyes narrowed slightly. "And in return, you want our technology." "We want to establish a mutually beneficial relationship," Marcus corrected. "Trade, that helps both our peoples prosper." Queen Velana waved her hand and the floating objects gently settled back where they belonged. "You speak as if we are equals, Ambassador Chen. That is amusing." Marcus kept his voice level. "In matters of trade, all partners are equal, Your Majesty. That's what makes trade work." A murmur went through the assembled courtiers. Marcus could tell from their expressions that no one had spoken to their queen like this in a very long time. Commander Zixara, who stood near the throne, looked particularly shocked. "Equals," the queen repeated as if the word tasted strange in her mouth. "Tell me, Ambassador, can your people do this?" She gestured toward a massive crystal pillar that stood in the corner of the throne room. The pillar began to glow brighter and brighter until it lit up the entire room like a miniature sun. Then, just as suddenly, the light faded back to normal. "No, Your Majesty, we cannot," Marcus admitted. "But I suspect your people cannot produce the quantum-stabilized titanium that powers our faster-than-light engines." The queen's advisor, an elderly Zentharan with elaborate robes, leaned over to whisper something in her ear. Marcus caught the words "impossible" and "surely they don't." "Show me," Queen Velana commanded. Marcus reached into his diplomatic pouch and pulled out a small metal cylinder. It was no bigger than his thumb, but it contained enough stabilized titanium to power a small starship for a year. The metal had a strange property. It seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, making it look like a hole in reality. "This single piece contains more energy than your largest power crystals," Marcus said, holding it up for her to see. "And our colonies can produce thousands of them every month." The queen leaned forward on her throne, suddenly very interested. "Impossible," No material can store that much energy in such a small space. With respect, Your Majesty, you're thinking about energy storage the wrong way. This doesn't store energy. It creates a stable connection to quantum foam itself. The energy is infinite, limited only by the extraction rate we program into the matrix. Marcus could see the wheels turning in the Queen's mind. Her advisors were whispering frantically to each other, trying to understand what they were seeing. This was clearly technology beyond even their advanced capabilities. You would trade this, quantum titanium, for our technology? The Queen asked. For specific technologies, yes, Marcus replied. We're particularly interested in your medical advances and your faster-than-light communication systems. The Queen was quiet for a long moment, considering his offer. Marcus could see that she was beginning to understand the benefits of a real partnership. But then her expression changed, becoming cold and arrogant again. I think you misunderstand your position here, Ambassador Chen, she said, her voice taking on a sharp edge. The Zentharan Empire does not negotiate with primitive species. I'm sorry? Marcus asked, genuinely confused by the sudden change in her tone. You come here with your little metal trinket and think you can bargain with us as equals. But look around you. The Queen gestured at the magnificent throne room, the floating palace, the advanced technology everywhere. We are gods compared to your species. Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice calm. Your Majesty, I think there may be a misunderstanding. We're not looking for charity. We're offering a fair exchange of resources. Fair exchange? The Queen laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. What could humans possibly offer that we couldn't simply take? The courtiers began to murmur among themselves, sensing the change in their Queen's mood. Some looked excited as if they were hoping for a confrontation. Others looked worried, perhaps understanding that this meeting was going very wrong. Your Majesty, Marcus tried again, humanity has always believed that cooperation benefits everyone involved. We're not here to threaten or be threatened. We're here to find ways our peoples can help each other. Help each other? Queen Velana stood up from her throne, her full height making her tower over the assembled court. You truly don't understand, do you? The Zentharan Empire doesn't need help from primitive mammals who barely learned to leave their home planet. The insult hit Marcus like a physical blow. Around the throne room, he could see some of the courtiers smiling or nodding in approval. Others looked uncomfortable as if they thought their queen was going too far. Primitive mammals, Marcus repeated quietly. Yes, the Queen continued, her voice growing louder and more confident. That's what humans are. You crawled out of caves only a few thousand years ago. You still fight wars over resources and territory. You haven't even learned to control your own minds, let alone develop real telepathic abilities. Marcus stood very still, his hands at his sides. The Queen was clearly warming to her topic now, feeding off the approval of her courtiers. The proper relationship between humans and Zentharans is obvious, she declared. You should be grateful to serve your betters. With proper training, your species could make adequate servants. Manual labor, basic maintenance, simple tasks that don't require real intelligence. The throne room had gone completely silent. Even the courtiers who had been encouraging the Queen seemed surprised by how far she had gone. Marcus could feel hundreds of eyes watching him, waiting to see how the human would react to such a devastating insult. Your people could live under our protection, the Queen continued, apparently not noticing the tension in the room. We would provide for your basic needs in exchange for your service. It would be a much better life than struggling on your own in this dangerous galaxy. Marcus took a slow, deep breath. In his many years as a diplomat, he had dealt with arrogant leaders, hostile negotiators, and impossible situations. But no one had ever suggested that humanity should be grateful to become slaves. I see, he said quietly. The Queen smiled, apparently thinking she had made her point. I'm glad you understand, Ambassador. Of course, we would be generous masters. Your people would be well treated as long as they remained obedient and didn't attempt to rise above their natural place. Marcus nodded slowly. Then, without saying another word, he turned around and began walking toward the throne room's main exit. Ambassador Chen, the Queen called after him, her voice sharp with surprise. Where are you going? We haven't finished our discussion. Marcus didn't stop walking. He didn't turn around. He didn't say a word. Ambassador. Queen Velana's voice was louder now with an edge of anger. I am speaking to you. Marcus reached the massive doors of the throne room. The guards standing there looked confused, unsure whether they should stop him or let him pass. Marcus looked at them calmly and nodded toward the doors. After a moment's hesitation, they stepped aside. "You will return here immediately," the Queen shouted from her throne. "I command it." Marcus paused in the doorway. For just a moment, he looked back over his shoulder at Queen Velana. She was standing next to her throne now, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Her courtiers were staring at her in shock, clearly unsure what to do. "Your Majesty has made her position clear," Marcus said in a voice that carried clearly across the vast room. Then he stepped through the doorway and was gone. Behind him, he could hear the Queen shouting orders to her guards, demanding that they bring him back. But Marcus Chen was already walking down the crystal corridors of the palace. His mind focused on only one thing: getting back to his ship and leaving this place as quickly as possible. The negotiation was over. Marcus Chen walked through the crystal corridors of the royal palace with steady, measured steps. Behind him, he could hear the commotion from the throne room growing louder. Queen Velana was shouting orders to her guards, demanding that they stop him and force him to return. But something strange was happening. As Marcus walked past groups of Zentharan nobles and servants, they simply stared at him. No one tried to block his path. The guards he passed looked confused and uncertain, as if they weren't sure what they were supposed to do. Commander Zixara appeared in the corridor ahead of him, flanked by 2 other guards. She held up her hand, signaling for Marcus to stop. "Ambassador Chen," she said, her voice formal but not hostile, "the Queen has ordered your return to the throne room." Marcus looked at her calmly. "I heard her orders, Commander. I choose not to follow them." The commander's large dark eyes studied his face. Marcus could feel her trying to probe his mind with her telepathic abilities, just as Queen Velana had done earlier. But just like before, nothing happened. Human minds remained closed to Zentharan mental intrusion. "I do not understand," Commander Zixara said, clearly frustrated. "Why can I not read your thoughts? What kind of mental shields do humans possess?" "We don't have mental shields," Marcus replied. "We're just naturally resistant to telepathic intrusion. It seems to be a basic feature of human brain structure." This was clearly news to the commander. She exchanged glances with her guards, who looked equally puzzled. Marcus realized that the Zentharans had probably never encountered a species they couldn't read telepathically. "The Queen wishes to continue the negotiations," the commander said, though her voice suggested she wasn't entirely sure about this. "No," Marcus said simply. "She doesn't." "I do not understand." Marcus stopped walking and turned to face Commander Zixara directly. "Your Queen made it very clear that she has no interest in negotiations. She's interested in subjugation. Those are 2 very different things." The commander looked uncomfortable. Perhaps there was a misunderstanding. The Queen can be direct in her communication style. "There was no misunderstanding," Marcus replied. "Queen Velana believes humans are primitive mammals who should be grateful to serve as slaves to the Zentharan Empire." She expressed this belief quite clearly and in considerable detail. Commander Zixara's blue skin seemed to pale slightly. Those were not her exact words. Actually, they were her exact words, along with several other colorful descriptions of humanity's place in her vision of the galaxy. The commander was quiet for a moment, clearly trying to figure out how to handle this situation. Marcus could see that she understood the problem. Her queen had badly insulted a visiting ambassador, and now that ambassador was leaving. This was exactly the kind of diplomatic incident that could cause serious problems. "What would it take for you to return to the throne room?" she asked finally. Marcus considered this question seriously. An apology would be a start. A genuine one, not something forced because her advisors told her she made a mistake. And if the Queen were to apologize, then I would listen to what she had to say. But I won't return to be lectured about humanity's proper place as servants to the Zentharan Empire. Commander Zixara nodded slowly. "I will. Convey your position to Her Majesty." "Thank you, Commander. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to return to my ship." The commander stepped aside and Marcus continued walking toward the palace exit. Behind him, he could hear her speaking rapidly into a small communication device, probably reporting back to the Queen. The walk back to the spaceport gave Marcus time to think about what had just happened. He had come to Zenthara Prime hoping to establish a mutually beneficial relationship between humanity and the Empire. Instead, he had been insulted, dismissed, and told that humans should be grateful to become slaves. What bothered him most wasn't even the insult itself. He had dealt with arrogant leaders before. What bothered him was Queen Velana's complete inability to see humans as equals. She seemed genuinely convinced that her species was superior in every way that mattered. Marcus reached the spaceport and made his way back to the Meridian. Captain Rivera met him at the airlock, took one look at his face, and immediately understood that the meeting had not gone well. "That bad?" she asked. "Worse," Marcus replied. "Request immediate departure clearance. I want to be out of this system as soon as possible." "Already done," the captain said. "I started the pre-flight sequence as soon as you left the palace. Something told me we might need to leave in a hurry." As the Meridian prepared for departure, Marcus went to his quarters and began composing his report. He wrote carefully, documenting exactly what Queen Velana had said and how she had said it. He included his assessment that the Zentharan Empire had no interest in genuine negotiations with humanity. An hour later, the ship lifted off from Zenthara Prime and headed toward the edge of the system. Marcus stood at the observation deck watching the crystal cities grow smaller and smaller until they disappeared entirely. "Any regrets?" Captain Rivera asked, joining him at the viewport. Marcus thought about this question. No. Queen Velana made her position very clear. There's nothing to negotiate when one side sees the other as naturally inferior. "What do you think will happen now?" "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "Maybe nothing. Maybe the Queen will forget about humans entirely and focus on species that are more willing to bow down to her." But even as he said this, Marcus suspected that wouldn't be the case. Queen Velana had been clearly interested in humanity's quantum-stabilized titanium. That technology could give the Zentharan Empire a significant advantage over their rivals. She wouldn't just forget about it. The Meridian reached the edge of the Zentharan system and prepared to jump to hyperspace. As they entered the jump sequence, Marcus's communication console chimed with an incoming message. It was from Commander Zixara. "Ambassador Chen," her image said from the screen. "The Queen wishes me to convey that she may have been unclear in her earlier statements. She requests that you return to continue your discussions." Marcus looked at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. "Sir?" Captain Rivera asked. "Should I respond to that?" "No," Marcus said. "We're done here." The ship jumped to hyperspace, leaving the Zentharan system behind. Marcus went back to his quarters and finished his report. He sent it directly to Earth via quantum communication, knowing that it would reach the United Earth Federation's leadership within hours. Over the next few days, as the Meridian traveled back toward human space, Marcus received several more messages from Zenthara Prime. Commander Zixara sent 3 more requests for him to return. An advisor named Kexthal sent what appeared to be a formal apology on behalf of the Queen, though it was worded in a way that didn't actually admit any wrongdoing. Marcus ignored them all. The most interesting message came on the 4th day of their journey. It was from Queen Velana herself. "Ambassador Chen," her image said from his screen, "I believe there may have been a cultural misunderstanding during our meeting. The Zentharan Empire values efficiency and clear hierarchies, but this does not mean we cannot work with other species as partners. I invite you to return so we can discuss terms that might be more acceptable to both parties." Marcus studied the Queen's face as she spoke. She looked calm and controlled, but he could see the tension around her eyes. This message had cost her something to send, probably a significant amount of pride, but it still wasn't an apology. It was an attempt to reframe her insults as a cultural misunderstanding. Marcus had been doing this job long enough to recognize a non-apology when he heard one. He deleted this message too. By the time the Meridian reached Earth, Marcus had received 12 more communications from various Zentharan officials. He ignored them all. When reporters asked him about the failed negotiations, he simply said that the Zentharan Empire had made their position clear and that humanity would respect their decision. What Marcus didn't say was that Queen Velana's insults had revealed something important about the Zentharan Empire. They saw other species as inherently inferior, useful only as servants or subjects. This wasn't just arrogance, it was a fundamental worldview that made genuine partnership impossible. As long as Queen Velana ruled the Zentharan Empire, there would be no negotiations with humanity. She had made that perfectly clear when she called humans primitive mammals who should be grateful to serve their betters. Marcus had simply taken her at her word. 3 weeks after Ambassador Marcus Chen returned to Earth, The first Xantheran merchant ship arrived at the edge of human space near the Alpha Centauri system. The ship's captain, a trade official named Kex Mara, fully expected to be welcomed with the usual mixture of fear and respect that the Xantheran Empire commanded throughout the galaxy. Instead, his ship was met by a small patrol cruiser from the United Earth Federation. "Xantheran vessel," came the calm voice over the communication channel. "You are approaching restricted space. Please state your business." Captain Kexamara was confused. "This is Captain Kexmara of the merchant vessel, Crystal Wind. We seek trade relations with the human colonies. I'm sorry, Captain, but we're not accepting trade requests from the Xantheran Empire at this time. Please adjust your course and exit this system." The Xantheran captain stared at his communication screen in disbelief. "You are refusing trade with the Xantheran Empire?" "That's correct, sir. Have a safe journey." The communication channel closed. Captain Kexamara tried calling back several times, but the human patrol ship didn't respond. After several hours of waiting, he finally turned his ship around and headed back to Xantheran space. This same scene played out over the next few weeks at every human colony and outpost. Xantheran merchants who had never been refused anything found themselves politely but firmly turned away from human territory. No explanations were given beyond, "We're not accepting trade requests at this time." Back on Xanthara Prime, Queen Vallana was receiving increasingly frustrated reports from her trade ministry. The humans weren't just refusing new trade agreements, they were cutting off all contact entirely. "I don't understand," she said to her advisor, Kexthol, as they reviewed the reports in her private study. "They need our technology. Why are they being so stubborn?" Kexthol, an elderly Xantheran who had served 3 generations of rulers, chose his words carefully. "Your Majesty, perhaps the humans were more offended by your frank assessment than we initially believed." "Offended?" The Queen looked genuinely puzzled. "I was simply explaining the natural order of things. How can they be offended by the truth? With respect, Your Majesty, other species sometimes have different perspectives on their place in the galaxy." Queen Vallana waved her hand dismissively. "Their perspectives don't change reality. Humans are still a primitive species that barely learned to leave their home planet. They should be grateful for any attention from the Empire." But as the weeks passed, it became clear that the humans were doing much more than just refusing Xantheran trade requests. They were actively working to isolate the Empire from the rest of the galaxy. Human ambassadors who had previously been minor players in galactic politics suddenly became very busy. They were meeting with representatives from dozens of other species, offering trade agreements, technological exchanges, and mutual defense pacts. The Zalari Confederation, which had been a reluctant client state of the Xantheran Empire for decades, suddenly announced that they were entering into a formal alliance with humanity. The Vorthon Republic, suppliers of exotic crystals that the Empire needed for their technology, signed an exclusive mining agreement with Earth's colonies. Most shocking of all, the Cathera Collective, a group of telepathic species that had always been natural allies of the Xantherans, announced that they were reassessing their relationship with the Empire in light of recent developments. "What recent developments?" Queen Vallana demanded when she heard this news. "We haven't done anything to the Cathara." "No, Your Majesty," said Commander Zixara, who had become the unofficial liaison for dealing with the human situation. "But apparently, word of your meeting with Ambassador Chen has spread throughout the galaxy." "What do you mean, word has spread?" Commander Zixara looked uncomfortable. "The humans have been sharing details of the meeting with other species. They're describing it as evidence of the Empire's attitude toward non-Xantheran peoples." Queen Vallana's eyes flashed with anger. "They're spreading lies about me?" "Not lies, Your Majesty. According to our intelligence sources, they're simply repeating your exact words from the throne room meeting." The Queen fell silent. She remembered what she had said to Ambassador Chen, but at the time it had seemed perfectly reasonable. Humans were inferior, that was just a fact. Why shouldn't she state facts clearly? But now those same words were being repeated throughout the galaxy, and somehow they weren't having the effect she had expected. Instead of convincing other species that the Xantheran Empire was strong and should be respected, they seemed to be making everyone nervous about their own relationship with the Empire. "The Dalox Mining Consortium has canceled their contract with us," Kexthal reported during a council meeting. "They're claiming scheduling conflicts. But our sources indicate they've signed an exclusive agreement with human colonies instead. The Theta shipyards have stopped returning our messages, added another advisor. We have 6 ships waiting for repairs that may never be completed. And the Galactic Trade Commission has announced they're opening an investigation into our business practices, said a third. Apparently, several species have filed complaints about our treatment of client states. Queen Velana listened to these reports with growing frustration. How had one failed meeting with a human ambassador led to such widespread problems? What are the humans offering these species that we can't provide? She asked. Partnership, Commander Zixara said quietly. What? According to our intelligence, the humans are offering genuine partnerships. Mutual trade agreements where both sides benefit equally. Defensive alliances where all members have equal voting rights. Technology exchanges where each species contributes what they do best. Queen Velana frowned. That sounds inefficient. Someone has to be in charge. The humans have created something they call the Alliance of Free Worlds, the commander continued. It's a loose confederation where each member species maintains its independence but cooperates for mutual benefit. They're not trying to rule anyone or establish dominance over other species. How can they maintain order without clear hierarchy? They seem to believe that voluntary cooperation is more effective than forced submission. The Queen found this concept difficult to understand. In Zentharan society, there had always been clear ranks and hierarchies. Everyone knew their place, and those at the top made decisions for those below. It was orderly, efficient, and logical. But the humans' approach was having results that the Queen couldn't ignore. Species that had been under Zentharan influence for decades were suddenly switching sides. Trade routes that had flowed through Empire space for generations were being redirected through human-controlled systems. Most concerning of all, 3 of the Empire's client worlds had formally requested independence and asked to join the human alliance. These were worlds that the Empire had controlled for over a century, and now they were simply walking away. We could force them to honor their agreements, suggested one of her military advisors. A show of strength would remind everyone why they should respect the Empire. But Queen Velana was smart enough to see the problem with this approach. Using military force to keep client states in line would only confirm what the humans were apparently telling everyone, that the Zentharan Empire was a collection of subject peoples held together by fear rather than mutual benefit. What do our economic projections look like? She asked her trade minister. The answer was not encouraging. The Zentharan Empire had grown wealthy by serving as the center of a vast trade network. Other species brought their resources to Empire worlds, where Zentharan technology and expertise added value before the goods were redistributed throughout the galaxy. But now that trade network was collapsing. Species were dealing directly with each other through human-mediated agreements. The exotic crystals that powered Zentharan technology were being sold exclusively to human colonies. The rare metals that the Empire needed for their starships were no longer available at any price. How long can we maintain current operations without access to external resources? The Queen asked. 6 months, Your Majesty, the Trade Minister replied. Perhaps 8 if we implement strict rationing. 6 months. Queen Velana stared out the window of her study at the crystal spires of her capital city. For 5 years, she had ruled over the most powerful empire in the galaxy. Her people commanded respect and obedience from dozens of species across hundreds of star systems. Now, because of one conversation with one human ambassador, that empire was crumbling around her. And the most frustrating part was that she still couldn't understand what she had done wrong. She had simply told Ambassador Chen the truth about humanity's place in the galaxy. The fact that he had been offended by the truth wasn't her fault. But as Queen Velana watched the lights of her city flicker in the evening darkness, she was beginning to understand that the truth, as she saw it, might not be as obvious to others as she had always believed. 6 months after Ambassador Marcus Chen walked out of the Zentharan throne room, Queen Velana stood at the observation deck of her palace, watching something that would have been impossible to imagine just a year ago. A massive human fleet hung in space at the edge of the Zenthara system. The ships were unlike anything in the Zentharan navy. Where Empire vessels were built for beauty and elegance, with flowing lines and crystal decorations, the human ships were purely functional. They looked like tools rather than art pieces, blocky, angular, and somehow threatening despite their relatively simple design. How many ships? The Queen asked Commander Zixara, who stood beside her with a data tablet. Over 200 confirmed vessels, Your Majesty. 47 capital ships, 63 cruisers, and approximately 100 smaller escort vessels. We're also detecting at least 12 ships of unknown configuration. Queen Velana studied the fleet through the palace's enhanced viewing system. The human ships weren't moving closer, but they weren't leaving either. They were just waiting. What do they want? She asked. We don't know, Your Majesty. They haven't responded to any of our communication attempts. The Queen had been receiving reports about human military buildup for months, but she hadn't taken them seriously. Humans were supposed to be a primitive species with limited technology. Even if they had some advanced materials like the quantum-stabilized titanium Ambassador Chen had shown her, they couldn't possibly match the Xantheran Empire's military power. But the fleet hanging in her system suggested otherwise. Analysis of their weapons? She asked. Commander Zixara looked uncomfortable. Our long-range sensors are having difficulty penetrating their ship's hulls. The quantum titanium they use appears to interfere with our scanning technology. We can detect energy signatures that suggest significant weapon systems, but we can't determine their exact capabilities. Queen Velana felt a chill run down her spine. For the first time in her life, she was facing an unknown military force that her people couldn't easily analyze or understand. Your Majesty, said Kexthol as he approached from behind, we're receiving a communication request. From the human fleet? No, Your Majesty. From Admiral Sarah Torres of the United Earth Federation. She's requesting permission to enter the system. The Queen frowned. Just one ship? Apparently so. She says she wishes to discuss terms between equals. Those words hit Queen Velana like a physical blow. Terms between equals. It was almost exactly what Ambassador Chen had said 6 months ago. Before she had explained to him that humans were primitive mammals who should be grateful to serve their betters. Should I grant permission for her to enter the system? Kexthol asked. Queen Velana looked out at the massive human fleet again. She was beginning to understand that she didn't really have a choice. Yes, she said quietly. Grant permission. Admiral Sarah Torres arrived at Xanthera Prime 6 hours later in a ship that was even more impressive than the fleet waiting at the system's edge. The vessel was sleek and modern, clearly built with technology that the Empire didn't fully understand. It landed at the same spaceport where Ambassador Chen had arrived 6 months earlier. Admiral Torres was a tall woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. She wore a simple black uniform with minimal decorations, but something about her bearing suggested she was someone who was used to being obeyed. Queen Velana received her in the same throne room where she had met Ambassador Chen. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. The Queen sat on her throne, but she didn't display her telekinetic powers or try to intimidate her visitor. The assembled courtiers were quiet and nervous, clearly aware that their empire was facing its greatest crisis in generations. Admiral Torres walked across the vast floor with confident steps. When she reached the throne, she gave a polite nod of her head, the same respectful but not submissive gesture that Ambassador Chen had made months earlier. Your Majesty, Admiral Torres said in a clear voice, I am Admiral Sarah Torres representing the United Earth Federation and the Alliance of Free Worlds. Admiral, the Queen replied, keeping her voice carefully neutral. I welcome you to Xanthera Prime. Thank you. I understand that Your Majesty may have some questions about the fleet currently positioned at the edge of your system. Queen Velana did indeed have questions, but she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answers. I admit I'm curious about your intentions, Admiral. Our intentions are peaceful, Your Majesty. The fleet is there as a demonstration of the Alliance's commitment to protecting its members and their interests. And what interests might those be? Admiral Torres pulled out a small data pad and consulted it briefly. Several worlds that were formerly under Xantharan protection have requested independence and asked to join the Alliance. We're here to ensure their right to self-determination is respected. Queen Velana felt her heart sink. She had feared this was coming, but hearing it stated so directly made it real. You're here to steal our client worlds. No, Your Majesty. We're here to honor the freely expressed wishes of sovereign peoples. The worlds of Kepler 442b, Gliese 606 Centi, and Proxima Centauri b have formally withdrawn from their agreements with the Empire and requested Alliance membership. Those 3 worlds had been cornerstones of the Empire's economy for over a century. They provided essential resources and served as major trade hubs. Losing them would be catastrophic, They have existing agreements with the Empire, the Queen said, though she knew how weak this sounded. Agreements that were signed under threat of military action, Admiral Torres replied calmly. The Alliance does not recognize forced agreements as legitimate. Queen Vellana wanted to argue, but she knew the Admiral was right. Most of the Empire's agreements with client worlds had been signed after demonstrations of Xantheran military power. At the time, it had seemed like efficient diplomacy. Now it was being used against her. What do you want? The Queen asked finally. I want to discuss the future relationship between the Xantheran Empire and the Alliance of Free Worlds, Admiral Torres said. It doesn't have to be antagonistic. There's room in the galaxy for both approaches to civilization. Both approaches? Your empire values hierarchy, order, and clear lines of authority. Many species find comfort in that structure. The Alliance values independence, cooperation, and mutual benefit. Many species prefer that approach. There's no reason we can't coexist. Queen Vellana considered this. And if we refuse to recognize the independence of our former client worlds? Admiral Torres's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes grew colder. Then the Alliance would be forced to protect its members from aggressive actions by hostile powers. The threat was delivered so calmly that it took the Queen a moment to process it. Admiral Torres was telling her that if the Empire tried to retake its former client worlds, the human fleet would stop them. You're prepared to go to war with the Xantheran Empire? The Queen asked. We're prepared to defend the Alliance and its members, Admiral Torres replied. Whether that leads to war depends entirely on the Empire's actions. Queen Vellana looked around her throne room at her assembled advisors and courtiers. She could see the fear in their faces. The mighty Xantheran Empire, which had dominated this region of space for centuries, was being threatened by a species they had dismissed as primitive mammals just 6 months ago. Admiral Torres, the Queen said slowly, I'm curious about something. Your predecessor, Ambassador Chen, was offended by some comments I made during our meeting, but he never threatened us or demanded apologies. He simply left. Why? Admiral Torres smiled slightly. Ambassador Chen is a diplomat, Your Majesty. His job is to find solutions through negotiation and compromise. When you made it clear that you had no interest in treating humanity as equals, he concluded that diplomacy was impossible and reported back accordingly. And then humanity did what we always do when diplomacy fails. We adapted. We found other partners, built new alliances, and created alternatives to the systems that excluded us. Queen Vellana felt a cold understanding settling over her. You're saying that humans don't get angry when insulted. You just work around the problem. Exactly. Ambassador Chen wasn't offended by your words, Your Majesty. He simply took them at face value. You said humans should serve as slaves to the Empire, so he concluded that the Empire had no interest in mutually beneficial relations. Everything that followed was based on that conclusion. The Queen stared at Admiral Torres, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of her mistake. She had thought Ambassador Chen's departure was an emotional reaction to her harsh words. Instead, it had been a calculated strategic decision based on his assessment of the Empire's intentions. What would it take, the Queen asked quietly, for the Alliance to consider the Xantheran Empire as a potential partner rather than a threat? Admiral Torres consulted her datapad again. The Alliance would need to see evidence that the Empire is committed to respecting the sovereignty and independence of other species. No more forced agreements. No more client states that exist only because they're afraid of your military power. And in return,